lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or in the alternative, face certain death.
Israel is bombing Iran's capital for a second day. Large explosions have been heard across Tehran. Israel's military says it's carrying out what it's calling a broad wave of strikes in the heart of the Iranian capital.
The Middle East is boiling once again. But this is not just a fight between Israel and Iran, it is a long-term strategy, decades in the making. Hezbollah's missiles, drone attacks launched from Yemen, underground nuclear facilities, and the looming economic threat over the Strait of Hormuz. These are not isolated events. They are pieces of a much larger design. Iran has constructed what many analysts call a ring of fire, while Israel is moving closer to what it considers its final red lines. On both sides stand global superpowers, each protecting their own strategic interests. This is not merely the anatomy of a regional war. This is the anatomy of World War III. To understand the depth of hostility between Israel and Iran, we need to step back to 1979. Before that year, Iran and Israel were quiet partners. They shared intelligence and even cooperated militarily. But the 1979 Iranian Revolution did not just change a government, it permanently rewired the geopolitics of the region. The Israel that had been a partner to the Shah's Iran became the little Satan in the rhetoric of Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran. This hostility, born from revolution, was not an ordinary political rivalry. It was ideological, rooted deeply in competing visions of legitimacy, identity, and regional order. For the next 4 decades, that ideological conflict fueled violence across the Middle East. It shaped weapons programs, built militant networks, and forged alliances that now threaten global stability. During the 1980s and 1990s, this hostility evolved into a new strategic doctrine. Iran concluded that a direct, conventional war with Israel would be costly and unsustainable. Instead, it developed a proxy strategy, a method of bleeding its adversary through 1,000 wounds. Under this strategy, Hezbollah was born in Lebanon in 1982. Hezbollah, and the conflict did not remain confined to the Middle East. In 1994, a massive bombing struck the AMI Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. The attack was widely attributed to Iran and its emerging proxy, Hezbollah. The battlefield had already gone global. Iran's grand strategy was simple and strategically sophisticated: surround the adversary, build a ring of fire. Instead of direct confrontation, construct a network of powerful militias, what Tehran calls the axis of resistance, a decentralized military architecture capable of pressuring Israel from multiple fronts, across multiple domains, continuously. But this is a chessboard where the rules are shifting. Some pieces are advancing, others are deliberately restrained. And that is precisely what makes this battlefield volatile and unpredictable. The crown jewel of this ring of fire is Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not merely a militia. It functions as a hybrid army. Estimates suggest it commands roughly 45,000 trained fighters, including its elite Radwan force, a unit specifically designed for cross-border offensive operations. Its real power, however, lies in its arsenal. Analysts estimate that Hezbollah possesses more than 150,000 rockets and missiles. Hundreds of these are high-precision systems capable of striking any Israeli city or critical infrastructure, power plants, airports, military bases, within minutes. Yet, there is a crucial nuance. Despite escalating tensions between Israel and Iran, Hezbollah has not fully entered the war. Tehran has not activated it at maximum capacity. Why? Because Hezbollah is Iran's strategic reserve, its ultimate deterrent, a weapon preserved for a decisive moment. There is also domestic pressure within Lebanon. Lebanon has already endured economic collapse and political paralysis. Its population does not want another devastating war. For now, Hezbollah is a loaded gun aimed at Israel, but the trigger has not been pulled. Now, consider the second major piece, the Houthis in Yemen. Houthis in the current conflict environment, the Houthis have emerged as Iran's most active proxy. They are the only group that has consistently launched direct drone and missile attacks toward Israel. Strategically, their value is immense. They have forced Israel to contend with a distant southern front. More importantly, through attacks on maritime routes, they have demonstrated the capacity to disrupt global shipping in the Red Sea, a choke point critical to international trade flows. Finally, we arrive at the Iraqi and Syrian militias, the tripwire. After the Syrian civil war, these militias are not as cohesive or powerful as they once were. For now, they remain relatively quiet. But this silence is deceptive. It is a latent escalation trigger. In Iraq, Iran-backed groups such as Kataib Hezbollah have issued explicit warnings. If the United States becomes directly involved in the war, they will target U.S. bases and interests across the region, Kataib Hezbollah. And that is where the equation becomes global, because once American forces are attacked, the conflict stops being a regional proxy war and begins to resemble a systemic confrontation between state actors. That is the edge on which this crisis now stands. This is a tripwire, a trigger that could transform a regional war into a superpower confrontation. It is the first domino, and once it falls, the chain reaction could become uncontrollable. The conflict is unfolding at the doorstep of the world's most critical economic choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow corridor. If Iran were to close it, that would not simply be an act of war against a rival state. It would amount to the opening of an economic war against the entire global system. The consequences would be devastating for both developed and developing nations. If the Strait of Hormuz were shut down, crude oil prices, currently around $80 per barrel, could surge dramatically, potentially reaching $150 or more. Europe, already struggling with economic fragility and high energy costs, would face runaway inflation and industrial slowdowns. China, the world's largest oil importer, could experience manufacturing shutdowns, supply chain disruptions, and rising domestic instability. India, heavily dependent on the Gulf oil imports, would confront a severe trade deficit and potentially destabilizing inflationary pressure. Proxy battles, cyber attacks, and economic coercion are all unfolding under the shadow of a far greater fear: nuclear war. For Israel, a nuclear-armed Iran represents an existential threat, one it believes it cannot tolerate. For Iran, which perceives itself as strategically encircled, nuclear capability appears closer than ever before. This brings us to what analysts call Iran's nuclear dash. There is a technical term known as nuclear breakout time, the amount of time required for a country to produce enough fissile material for a single nuclear weapon. Under current 2025 assessments, some experts estimate that Iran's breakout time may have shrunk to as little as 1 week. Iran possesses a substantial stockpile of uranium enriched to 60%, roughly 400 kilograms. Weapons-grade uranium requires 90% enrichment, and once the 60% threshold is crossed, the leap to 90% can happen rapidly. This process is enabled by Iran's advanced IR-6 centrifuges, which operate far more efficiently than earlier models. Much of this activity is believed to be centered at the Fordow facility, an underground site built deep inside a mountain, beyond the easy reach of conventional airstrikes. One of the most alarming aspects is the limited access granted to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Monitoring constraints mean the world does not have full visibility into what is happening inside Fordow. If Iran were to produce a nuclear weapon, it already has delivery systems capable of carrying it. Missiles such as the Shahab-3 and SOMAR have the range to strike Israeli territory with a nuclear warhead. This is Iran's strategic blueprint. But in this high-stakes game, Israel is also believed to maintain an ultimate contingency doctrine, a retaliatory posture often referred to as the Samson option, a strategy implying that if Israel faces annihilation, it would respond with overwhelming force. This is Israel's rumored strategy, a doctrine spoken of only in hushed tones. According to this concept, if the Israeli state were to conclude that its destruction is inevitable, that it is on the verge of annihilation, it would respond with its undeclared nuclear arsenal in a way that ensures its enemies are destroyed alongside it, taking them down with it. This would not be triggered by a minor strike. The potential triggers are extreme: a successful nuclear, chemical, or biological attack on Israel, or a coordinated multi-front conventional assault in which Hezbollah, Syria, and other proxies attack simultaneously, and Israel's military begins to lose control. The Samson option represents Israel's ultimate red line. On one side, there is the countdown of a potential nuclear breakout. On the other, the fear of catastrophic retaliation. This is nuclear brinkmanship at its most dangerous. where a single miscalculation could mean devastation for the entire region and possibly far beyond. A war between Israel and Iran can never remain limited to just those two states. The fire would spread globally because the world's superpowers are already embedded in this equation. Each has allies, economic stakes, and clearly defined strategic red lines. This is not merely a regional conflict, it resembles a proxy battleground in a new Cold War. One misunderstanding, one miscalculation, could trigger direct confrontation between major powers. The United States' position is publicly clear: ironclad support for Israel. Intelligence cooperation, advanced weaponry, missile defense systems. At the same time, Washington is trying to avoid being pulled into direct war. However, it has unmistakable red lines. First, confirmed Iranian acquisition of a nuclear weapon. Second, a large-scale successful attack on Israeli cities causing mass casualties. Third, and most critically, any direct attack on U.S. forces or military bases in the region. If any of these thresholds are crossed, it would become extremely difficult for the United States to remain outside the conflict.